So this session is going to be about scaling to the US, and I'm going to talk about what kind of companies should go to the US, what kind of companies shouldn't go to the US, and I'm going to give some specific examples. Just a little bit about myself. I'm a general partner at 500 Startups Istanbul. As many of you may know, 500 Startups is a global organization. We've invested into over 2,400 companies across 75 different countries, and we have 20 unicorns in our portfolio. The goal of the organization is to democratize access to capital and expertise around the globe. And we've started 500 Istanbul 4 years ago. We did 40 investments in Southeast Europe and Turkey over the past 4 years. We have our second fund now. We want to continue to invest into the region briefly. So all of my examples are either going to be my experience through 500 Startups, or I'm going to talk about my podcast. It's kind of an advertising right now, but I also have a podcast. It's called CC, and I focus global success stories from local regional ecosystems. We feature entrepreneurs from Eastern Europe, Turkey, Middle East, etc., who have started locally but built global technology powerhouses. The reason I'm doing this podcast is because a lot of the content out there on entrepreneurship and startups was really Americanized. But a success story from Turkey resonates more with an entrepreneur from Georgia or Ukraine compared to a success story from the US. So I tried to feature entrepreneurs from this region who have gone global successfully. So a lot of the examples are going to be based on these two. First of all, I want to touch this paradigm called the population paradox. What population paradox meant for me at the time was we see from countries like Israel, Estonia, or Denmark, or Sweden produce more unicorns compared to more middle market countries like Spain, Italy, or Turkey, or Romania, or Poland. And I call this the population paradox. So the smaller the population gets, the more unicorns they create. And the reason of that being is the local market is so shallow, it's so small that entrepreneurs have to think global from day one. And with that perspective of thinking global from day one, that becomes their core advantage. That's why an entrepreneur from Israel has a better chance of making it in the US, or an entrepreneur from Estonia has a better chance of making it in the US compared to an entrepreneur from Turkey, because this Turkish entrepreneur or the Polish entrepreneur focuses on the local market for a while and then tries to go to the US market. But by then, perhaps the US market is already taken either by some local players or other international players trying to go in. So my whole goal with 500 Istanbul, our goal from 500 Istanbul, was to create the population paradox for Turkey and push more entrepreneurs to go global from day one and not even try the local market. We call these entrepreneurs the Renaissance entrepreneurs. So these entrepreneurs are the first home run success stories from these ecosystems. They create the first global companies that are perhaps unicorns or more, and then they lay the foundation, they pave the way for the new generation of entrepreneurs to come. Our whole goal at 500 Istanbul is to create these Renaissance entrepreneurs from Eastern Europe and Turkey. And this creates a huge multiplier effect. PayPal is a good example of that from the Bay Area. As you can see, the PayPal mafia went on to create huge companies like YouTube, Yelp, LinkedIn, Tesla, 500 startups, etc. So the goal is to create companies like PayPal in places like Turkey to create this multiplier effect and have more entrepreneurs come out from these great companies. You can see this multiplier effect in our region as well. We've seen a lot of entrepreneurs come out of UiPath in Romania to start their own ventures. Udemy is a company that was founded by two Turkish entrepreneurs. In fact, the founder, Eren, initially started the company in Ankara in Turkey, later relocated to San Francisco. Udemy still has its major operations in Ankara. And from our companies, we've invested into 3 engineers that were ex-Udemy employees, left Udemy, started their own company, and then we funded them. So this is the multiplier effect that we're trying to create as we do the geo arbitrage from this region to the US. But not every company has to target the US. For example, Pipedrive is a good example of that. And we had Ragnar, one of its co-founders, on our podcast CC last year. He said that the biggest defensibility of Pipedrive is the fact that they're market leader in 20 countries. They're the market leader in places like Brazil and Indonesia and Russia at the same time. So if you want to beat Pipedrive, you have to beat them in Brazil, Russia, and Indonesia. And that becomes their core defensibility for their competitors. A good example from our portfolio, similar to Pipedrive, is a company called Insider. Insider just raised about $50 million. Their previous round was led by Sequoia. They're a marketing tech automation company. And initially when they started in Turkey. So they grew their team in Turkey. They've reach some resources in Turkey. They understood how to differentiate their product in Turkey, but then being successful in Turkey means if you're going to go to the US, it would be suicidal. The market is more mature. There's much more competition. It's a well-established market. So if you're successful in a place like Turkey, you have to go to countries that are similar to Turkey from a market dynamic standpoint. So what Insider did is they went to Middle East, then Southeast Asia, then Eastern Europe, and today they have offices in 25 countries, and they raised $50 million over the past 8 years since they started, and now they're well established. Now they can try the US market, but to go to the US earlier on would have been suicidal for the company. So while we try to understand which companies should go to the US, which companies shouldn't go to the US, we divide the world into two. We say the red ocean companies, the blue ocean companies. The red ocean companies are similar to Insider. They're in very competitive spaces. The market is well established. You can see the size of the market, so you're not taking a market risk because the market is there. But there are a number of unicorns, number of companies that have already went public. And if you're a new player coming into this well-established market, going to a mature market like the US can actually kill the company. And then there are the companies that are much in blue ocean spaces. These companies are going for the newly emerging markets where the market size is a big question mark. Maybe the market will never be big enough. You never know. You're taking a huge market risk, but you want to go to the place where technology adoption is the highest. You want to go to the place where enterprise technology budgets are the largest, where early adopters are. And now we try the US. A good example of a red ocean company is Insider. Now that they've gone big enough, they're trying to find different niches and corners where they can differentiate to push themselves to the blue ocean and then try more mature markets like the UK or US. A more blue ocean market, more blue ocean company would be our portfolio company, Firefly. Maybe you've seen their screens. So they mount these devices on top of Uber and Lyft vehicles, and they do geo-targeted out-of-home advertising. So out-of-home advertising is huge in the US. Its supply is very limited. Ride sharing is huge in the US. So what the founders did was they tried the US market from the get-go. They had their backend technology, meaning software and hardware teams in Turkey, but they only targeted the US market. Firefly raised $120 million to date, led by Google Ventures, NFX, and Decent Capital. For companies like Firefly, we push them to the US. We feel the US is the market that they should go to. For companies like Insider, where it's much more competitive, we do more of a local play, then a regional play, then a global play, and then you try for more mature markets like the US. As we started the fund, we really focused on this thing called geo arbitrage. So doing a talent arbitrage from this region to the US. Talent arbitrage means the cost of developing in a place like Turkey or Georgia is much lower than the US. But that by itself is not a big advantage. It becomes an advantage if you're going for blue ocean markets. In the US, for an entrepreneur to be successful, they have to have the right team, they have to have the right product, but timing also has to be right. If you're too early to the market, to sustain in the market for 3 years or 5 years or 7 years would take millions of dollars, and it's very tough. But if you started in Turkey, if you have your back-end office in Turkey, you're going for a blue ocean markets, perhaps too early. You have to sustain in the market for 3 years or 5 years. It's much more easier because your costs are lower. It's easier to reach break even and have early sustainability. And once you have early sustainability, you've got unlimited runway. You can do multiple pivots and try the idea over and over again until it works, until the timing becomes right. So you can actually correct timing. That's why we tried to invest into more blue ocean companies. And these were the companies that we pushed to the US. Hyper-local businesses, we tend not to push to the US market. These businesses are like Uber, for example, where the buyer is local, the seller is local, the transaction is happening locally. If you establish such a business in a place like Turkey or Georgia and you want to target the US market, chances of that working out are very slim because the whole transaction happens locally. You have to recreate that whole value chain again in a different market, which tends to be very tough and less scalable. Then the question becomes why the US? And in one of our podcasts, we had an entrepreneur, Richard, who founded the company called Juro. It's a legal tech company. They have their technology office in Scandinavia. Their core market was the UK, and now they're targeting the US market. And what he said really resonated. He said that SaaS market in the US is larger than the rest of the world combined. For a lot of the work verticals, that's the case. No matter what vertical you're going for, perhaps probably the market in the US is larger than the other 200 countries combined. But then there are also local value chains, missing parts in the value chain locally. If you look into Turkey, for example, follow-on funding. In 2018, there has only been 4 deals that raised more than $1 million in Turkey, which is very shallow. In 2019, that number grew to 5 deals, which is very low. There's lack of early adapters. If you look into exits from Turkey, top 3 exits, none of them did any sales in Turkey because there were not early adapters that were going to adapt that technology in Turkey. There's lack of local acquirers. Unfortunately, as you grow the company, you want to exit it. Your local acquirer, 99% of the chances, are not in your domiciled country if you're based in a country like Turkey or anywhere in Eastern Europe. And then there's tech expenditure. Of course, the US IT spendings is larger than almost the rest of the world combined. But it's important to know your disadvantages and advantages as you scale to the US. And that's what we're trying to work on as we coach our founders who are trying to make the move. A good episode that I had was with Christina from TalkDesk. TalkDesk is also a 500 startups portfolio company. They have their technology team in Portugal. They've targeted the US from the get-go. And he said that you have to Americanize the company from the get-go. You have to know that you're going to target the US market from the get-go so that the whole culture is going to be around that. And a big piece of that is who your VCs are. Over the past year, I've done a lot of episodes with great VCs who are only investing into entrepreneurs that target the US market. For example, Credo from Czech Republic, it's a regional fund focused on Central Europe. We had a great episode with Andre. They only invest into Central European companies that target the US market. No matter how big the idea is, how great may the European market be, they only do that and they're only focused on that. One Way Ventures, Semyon, they only invest into immigrant entrepreneurs. So no matter where the entrepreneur is from or where their back-end office is, they only invest into entrepreneurs who have made the move, who've relocated to the US and is convicted to make it successful in the US. So it's very important to partner up with such VCs from the get-go. And as we push entrepreneurs to make the move, either to East Coast or West Coast or to Bay Area, it doesn't matter, they feel lonely. Because in most of the cases, if there are 2 or 3 co-founders, one of them make the move, the other one or the other 2 stay back at home, say in Turkey, and then the one that made the move is pretty lonely. And now we have to surround him or her with the necessary structure to be able to build a team in the US. And that creates a lot of cultural issues as well as companies go global, because they start hiring in the US, they hire their VP of sales or marketing in the US. They have most of their investors sometimes from the US. But if the company culture is still Georgian, if the company is still Turkish, that's a really big obstacle for the company. So what we tend to do is push for English from the start. A lot of our portfolio companies have all of their verbal and written communication in English, so that the employees their recruitment efforts, the employees that take in, also adapt to that culture, so that the culture is global. I don't want to say global, let's say US centric from the get-go if you're targeting the US. There's also a huge East Coast trend. When we started investing 4 years ago, actually 5 years ago by now, a lot of the entrepreneurs wanted to move to the Bay Area, but that slowly shifted away, I feel like. A lot of the entrepreneurs that are coming from Asia or Europe want to be on the East Coast, but not the West Coast, for time zone differences and for culture adaptability. We had a great episode with Raul from Typing DNA on our podcast. They're based out of Romania. They have their technology team in Romania. Raul did the move to New York, and they're a business-to-developer company. So they target predominantly developers to use their product for authentication. Yet they did New York because it was better culturally for the company to be located in New York. I see similar things happen to Pipedrive as well. So Ragnar said in the episode that you don't have to be in the valley to succeed, and they have proved that Pipedrive also has their US operations on the East Coast. So I see East Coast as trending compared to West Coast for European startups at least. And then make sure that you have enough of a war chest. PriceFX is another company from Central Europe. They've raised probably around $65 million to date. They do price optimization for retail, and they've launched their US US operations 2 years ago. But what happened was their competitors opened a lawsuit against them, which drained more than $10 million for the company. And it was a big learning for Marcin. And he said that if you're targeting the US, get ready for the unknown and make sure you have necessary resources. And by necessary resources, of course, we mean funding. A lot of the entrepreneurs make the move to the US and make the move to the Bay Area because they think it's much easier to fundraise in Silicon Valley. But what they don't know is it's much more easier to fundraise in Silicon Valley if you're actually from Silicon Valley, if you actually have the network. A good episode on that on our podcast, if you guys want to listen, is with the founder of Firefly, Khan. So they raised $120 million to date from Google Ventures, NFX, Decent Capital. And he told how he hacked the minds of investors through networking, how wide of a network he had before he started fundraising. So once he started fundraising, it only took him a couple months to close that round. And make sure that you get used to some VC's biases. Ragnar from Pipedrive said that a lot of the VCs wanted to invest into Pipedrive with the condition that the founders make the move to the Bay Area, and they never did. So they weren't really successful in getting Bay Area entrepreneurs onto the cap table of the company, but eventually they did become a unicorn. But it was a struggle for them to fundraise in Silicon Valley. And it's important to hack your way out of it. How we do it is we send companies to our San Francisco-based flagship accelerator so that they get a seal of approval. And then we try to get a lot of angels to surround them. It's not bad to have US angels on your cap table. In fact, it helps. Just to put some perspective, having a lot of US angels helps you Americanize the company. And Raul from Typing DNA, the Romanian company, did that tremendously well, where he raised $7 million from 30 investors. And he's happy about it. Apart from all the knowledge that and the network that comes with it, it helped the company culturally. So we try to do that as well. A lot of these companies, a lot of the startups are built to be sold. And if you look at the end of the value chain, let's delve into why a company would come and buy and acquire another company. So first, there's acqui-hires. This is M&A as an HR strategy for talent. Facebook has done that a lot previously with Drop.io and Hot Potato. Unfortunately, 80% of acqui-hires still happen only in the US. There's product and team acquisitions. So you not only buy the team, but you also buy the product so that the product lives in itself. Firebase, Periscope, Parse, Vine are all good examples of that. And all of these are US examples, unfortunately, again. The third is expansion acquisitions, and we divide expansion into three: segment, geography, and channel. Segment is if you want to go into different channels, say Demandware, you acquire Demandware to be able to go into retail. Geography is you go and buy a company in Turkey because you want to grow into the Turkish market. Channel is with Walmart did with Jet, where they wanted to acquire a company that has the direct-to-consumer channel. Unfortunately, a lot of the segment acquisitions and channel acquisitions happen in the US as well. And lastly, there are acquisitions that happen because it's an existential threat. You either buy the company or that company is probably going to beat you, just like what happened with WhatsApp and Facebook or Instagram and Facebook. Here, the multiples are great. You get companies that are sold for billions of dollars even before having any kind of revenue or any kind of profitability or sustainability in that sense. So unfortunately, when you look into the value chain from an exit perspective, a lot of the exits happen in the US. So either you target the US or you solely target the US or eventually you target the US, doesn't matter. US has to be in your game plan from day one. You have to be aware of your US competitors from day one. Lastly, for anyone to reach me, here's my email, here's my Twitter at Enis Hulli. And our podcast, as I've said, it's nothing professional. It's more amateur than you would expect. But we try to cover entrepreneurial success stories from Eastern Europe and Middle East. And most of these entrepreneurs have made it in the US. So if you're interested in the subject, I would suggest you listen to a couple episodes.
What do you recommend to brain training app for US market?
I'm assuming that that's a B2C play probably. First of all, a lot of your content, of course, your marketing material, anything about the company has to be native. So you have to have someone native in the company from the get-go, definitely. For performance marketing, a lot of our companies that do B2C onboard people, recruit people locally for performance marketing, because I think there's enough of a good know-how on this. If you're doing B2C, if you're doing a zero-touch sales model, it's easier to have sales and marketing locally, so I would suggest that. But to be able to track the US market, to be able to know what's happening in the US market and in the adjacent industries that can or perhaps will become your competitors, get someone from the US on board. A lot of our B2C success stories that from Turkey that targeted the US market never made the move. So I think a lot of my presentation was more targeted towards B2B SaaS and enterprise companies. I feel those entrepreneurs have to make the move. They have to be in the market that they're targeting. It isn't the case for B2C mobile apps with an in-app purchase nature.
Thank you a lot, Enis, for joining us. That was really helpful and valuable. I hope you will
thanks
join
for
us.
inviting me.
Hope you will join us later offline.
Will do. Bye-bye.